to close, I didn't want to wrap up just everything that we've already said today and rehash some of the things, but I did want to provide a little bit of context. And it happened for me at a conference that I went to in May. And this conference that I went to in May was the NAMM Fly-In. The National Association of Music Merchants does a fly-in. My friend Neil Lillian, who's here with us today, he and I were down in Washington for this fly-in. Here you see us, at the lobbying firm in front of the Capitol. There's Bernie Williams, a Yankee baseball player. He came down with us, and we had opera stars and television stars, and Neil and I are in there. And we were there to lobby for 3 days on behalf of arts education. And during that time, we had a lot of training and events that we went to. We had some food, more events, some music, more food, and then some lobbying on the Hill. And it was a fantastic day. And for me, it's really not my first time that I had been to Washington. I've lived in Washington for a while. As a matter of fact, this is me in 1994, as we're about to release the National Standards for Arts Education. There's Mike Green of the Recording Academy, and Secretary Riley, and John Mallman, the president of MENC, which is now NAFME, and then my former boss, Larry Lincoln, from NAMM. And we were there as part of the effort to make the arts a core subject at the federal level and to release the National Standards for Arts Education. So we recreated the photo, and there is Mike Blakesley from NAFME and Secretary Riley, who looks exactly the same as he did 20 years ago. Joe Lamont, who's now the CEO at NAMM, and then some other guy. So we were in Washington together, and on the first night that we were there, we were treated to a story from John Lewis. Now, John Lewis is like a walking monument. It was incredible to be in the same room with him. And he was talking about his life growing up. He talked about raising chickens and segregation, his calling to the civil rights movement. He spoke of Selma and of Dr. King, of the violence in the South, to the historic moment on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and those famous words, "I have a dream." And then he looked up at us and he said, without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. Now, it would take a few days for me to truly understand and appreciate what he was saying. Wednesday, we culminated our time together. We had a banquet and some great dinner and some great music. And I went back to my hotel room, and I just could not get to sleep. No matter what I did, my brain was just going too crazy. So at 5:30 in the morning, I decided just to get up and go for a walk. And because I was close to the National Mall, I decided that that's what I was going to do. So I entered into the National Mall along the Great Green there, and it was amazing to me because at 5:30 in the morning, something odd was happening on the National Mall. There was nobody there. It was completely empty, and it was silent for as far as the eye could see. So I was sitting there amazed that I had this opportunity to walk through the National Mall all by myself. And as I did, the birds started chirping, and as they were chirping, it was almost like they were inviting me to enjoy the National Mall and maybe see it through a set of fresh eyes. So I started my walk. I walked by the Capitol, and I entered, passing through the museum, the Art Museum, the National Museum of Art, both the modern building and the old building. And then across the way, I saw the Air and Space Museum. These are places that celebrate creativity and innovation. These are places that hold things from our modern art, our historic art, but then they also hold things about creativity and imagination that escape us into time and space. And as I went on, I saw the American Museum of the American Indian Museum, and the celebration of the history and culture of their art and their music that was embedded in this museum. As I continued on, I passed through the Hirshhorn Museum. Talk about creativity and innovation. Have you ever been through there? It's a monument to modern art and a spectacular place to be. I continued on, and as I passed by the National Museum of Natural History, where they celebrate and house a great collection of nature's finest creations. And right next to that, we have the American History Museum. And they're housing lots of things, including that most iconic of flags, the Star-Spangled Banner. The flag that flew over Fort McHenry in September of 1814 and was signifying the fact that our fledgling republic had survived another night. And it was also the inspiration for what is now our Star-Spangled Banner. And this museum also has a great collection of musical instruments and artifacts, things that celebrate our American history and culture. As I kept walking, I saw rising next to the American History Museum this brand new museum, the Museum of African American History and Culture, a place that will be celebrating and housing such things as Louis Armstrong's trumpet and Chuck Berry's car and Leadbelly's songbook. Now, by this point, you're probably figuring out that as I'm going on this walk, a musical and artistic theme is beginning to emerge for me. From there, I went to the Washington Monument, and I thought about the man who was our greatest Army general and our first president. I thought about the fifes and drums calling our revolutionary soldiers to battle under his command. And I pictured him sitting with his niece, where he would play the flute in duet. Moving on, I looked over to my left to see the Lincoln Memorial and Thomas Jefferson standing there in statuesque manner in that soft gray haze. Thought about his role in our Declaration of Independence and his own commitment to the arts for himself and for his family. I then turned to my left to see the south portico of the White House, and it reminded me of its first inhabitant, John Quincy Adams, and what he said, and what Tom Kane told us this morning, because it was John Adams who said, "I must study politics and war that my sons may have liberty to study painting, poetry, and mathematics and philosophy, that my sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography and natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and architecture in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain." I then thought about my own experiences at the White House when I was there producing the Concert for the Century when I was working for VH1. And it was there that President Clinton took to the stage and uttered these famous words. He said on live TV, "I don't think I would have been president if it wasn't for my school music program." Well, as this phrase and that southern drawl through which it was replayed in my mind faded, I then continued with my walk. I entered into the World War II Memorial and was awestruck by its beauty. I went to the left center pavilion that was constructed to honor the war in the Pacific, and I passed the inscription on the wall honoring Pearl Harbor, and then entering a pavilion to stand in awe of these huge giant eagles holding a horizontal wreath over top. And it was there that I was reminded of the famous words of Winston Churchill, when he was challenged by his finance minister asking for them to cut arts funding in order to better support the war effort. And Winston Churchill's reply was blunt and to the point. Then what are we fighting for? Indeed, I continued on to my journey and saw the stoic statues of the Korean War Memorial slogging through the muck and mire to my left, and the elegant angled white or black marble wall paying tribute to those who fought and died at Vietnam to my right. Indeed, what are we fighting for? I walked along the reflecting pool and started to contemplate my journey that week. I then came to the Lincoln Memorial and started to climb the steps. And as I reached the top of the steps, I passed through the huge marble columns to see Abraham Lincoln in complete and total peace and quiet. I read the inscription over his head. I turned to my left to read the Gettysburg Address chiseled into the white marble wall. I then walked out between those same marble columns and looked out upon that same empty vista, back toward the nation's capital in the distance, and the Washington Monument in front of it. I stood in that place where Martin Luther King stood some 50 years ago, where his noble lieutenant, John Lewis, had stood. And then I felt a shiver, because it was then that all of this finally began to make sense for me. Remember, John Lewis had stood before us just earlier that week and said that without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. These words came back and hit me hard, because what this great national mall had revealed to me on this day was something that made sense from that scrambled brain activity that I had, is the fact that our collective and national, state, and local efforts on behalf of arts education for everyone are connected in real and meaningful ways to the through lines of our great national history. This is something we just came up with. This is something that our founding fathers envisioned would be happening in our schools. We are just a small part of a much larger continuum to fulfilling the desires and dreams of both our founding fathers and world leaders of our recent past that traverses our history in a way that, and a centrality to our humanity that I had not really understood before. The mall reminded me of how important arts education is, not just for today, but for centuries, the important role that it plays for our students and the role that it must play moving forward. My point in all this is this one. All of us gathered here today are just the current keepers of the flame, working to keep the dreams of our forefathers alive by protecting and advancing the right of this and the next generation of citizens to a complete education that includes the arts. Our forefathers and mothers imagined a future they wanted for us to have. They imagined one with arts education. We must now keep their dream alive, do our part to protect and advance arts education for this generation, to whom we shall pass this torch so that they may carry it on for the next. We are building our chapter of this larger story. We are the keepers of the flame, and it was the flame handed to us. Our job, our obligation, our duty is to not let them down. And we must promote and commit ourselves from today to take this responsibility seriously, move forward, and do all that we can to bring Arts Ed Now to all of our students for this state and ultimately across our country. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today, and safe travels home.